Hello and welcome to 10 Ton Potato, the podcast where we talk about actual productivity on the Office 365 stack. Today it's the Azure stack with some Office 365 goodness. I'm Brad and I'm joined by my co-host Craig.
Hi, and in my new environment, so you don't have to see my wife's desk behind me, which is quite nice.
Blame your wife, eh? You had nothing to do and had nothing on there, obviously.
So my nice new work pod at our new offices, which is very funky.
Very good. Yeah, and also no barking dogs or screaming children. That'd be nice.
Yep, most certainly.
So today I'm excited because today we're going to use something in the AI space that is not just gimmickly powered by AI, it's actually useful, intelligent, and wonderful in my opinion. And in Craig's opinion, it's just one of my crazy requirements.
I just hope that the demo holds up to your exacting standards.
Well, let's see. Let's see if AI can hold up to our standards. So I pitched Craig this option. We've got policies and we've got procedures, and we keep them in our SharePoint intranet. And if anyone has a question, they can go to the policy, find the policy, and then read it to answer their question. So if we took OpenAI, pointed it towards our policies and procedures, and then created a Teams bot which could be used to chat to bring back the information from those policies and procedures based on questions asked, we would have a very, very nice tool. And I asked Craig.
That's assuming that you've got your licensing for Teams sorted out.
No, I'm a Microsoft partner. I get Teams for free.
Little segue there, though, but obviously, I mean, you pointed out to me last week around the licensing changes with Microsoft Teams that I'm not sure everyone out there knows about.
I think you're right. Obviously, this is what's happened. Microsoft have come out and now licensing Teams separately from Office 365. Used to be combined, now it's separate. And I think it's because they're not greedy. I thought at first, definitely a little bit of a greed shifting gear. Microsoft needs more money because they're not the richest company in the world anymore. But it's actually, I think it's because of the competition board.
Yeah, but for me, it's an interesting decision because I thought about this a bit. And by decoupling it, well, what are they actually achieving? Because the status quo with the Microsoft products in Microsoft 365 is that you can buy them all separately and you can buy them bundled as the 365 offering. So Exchange, SharePoint, Power Automate, Power Apps, you can buy them all as separate licenses, or you buy 365 and it's all bundled together. So it's an interesting one for me, where I could imagine a Teams license as a standalone and then bundling it with 365. I think it might hurt them a little bit, and the likes of Slack could come in if people now have to pay for Teams and for their 365
It's still
license.
cheaper.
I don't know.
Teams still works out cheaper than anything. Slack.
And it's fully integrated to everything in Microsoft 365. Makes a perfect sense to have it bundled. Anyway, we'll leave that where it is.
Slack, remember they were going to sell and then they didn't. And then Teams came in. And now they're like, hold on, guys, that's unfair. And now they're like, wait a second, should we have sold maybe? And I think that's exactly what happened. So now they're just complaining bitterly that Teams is actually better than it. So
anyway, we digress. Let's get back to OpenAI and making
yes,
it useful.
so we need this bot to work. And I remember the old bots we used to make, and they were, if we look back on what we can do today, trash, because they were just Q&A. And if you asked exactly the right question, you could get a number of answers. But if you couldn't phrase the question exactly correctly, you couldn't get a good answer. So now we've got these LLM bots, which are much smarter. Yes.
We hope.
So, show me what you got.
Okay, excellent. So I'll share my screen, but whilst I'm doing so, just talk through the premise here. So one of the big things is obviously Copilot is being hyped up, and everyone's talking about
Cascade,
the
cascade.
use of Copilot. But what about your staff members who don't have Copilot and they also want the goodness of AI and generative AI and the like? So, the example that we put together is actually using OpenAI built on Azure. And we utilizing it with a couple of technologies to enable us to search all of our internal documentation. So, for the demo purposes, we've set up an employee onboarding area on SharePoint and created some libraries with policies and procedures and playbooks. Now, you'd imagine people starting up at the organization, they familiarize themselves with these, they watch the videos, they read through the documentation, but at the same time, they probably don't read through everything and understand it necessarily, or they might have a quick question about something that they have seen, they glanced over, and now they want to find more information about it. So what you would generally have is a library of policies and procedures and playbooks for your organization. So let's go and check out the setup here. I'm moving across into Azure. And within Azure, we've got a couple of different functions or resources that we needed to build out. So the first is your OpenAI license. Now, quite importantly, if you are using OpenAI, you need to register or apply for an OpenAI license. It's not just a resource that you can create on your Azure
Why? Why
instance.
do I
So
need to
this is a bit of a
register? Why
stumbling
couldn't I
block.
just use it?
I think it's just a check that Microsoft have put in place so that this doesn't just jump and all of their resources get eaten up with people trying out different AI services.
So, if I'm an
I
evil
assume that's the
giraffe,
case.
it will know that.
Sorry,
If
if
I'm
you
an
have.
evil giraffe,
Who knows? Who knows? But I mean, when you fill in the registration form, it asks you exactly what you're going to be using it for, and then it gives you the license. Now, there are a couple of versions of that. There was the 3.5 version, and then you could apply for the GPT-4 version. That has a big difference in terms of how many tokens you can use. So, tokens being when you ask a question and send information through for generative AI, um, your information is broken up into a number of tokens. Now, 3.5 version of GPT allowed about 8,000 tokens, whereas GPT-4 can get up to 32,000 tokens. So quite a difference in the amount of data that you can pass through to the
did you just make
GPT-4
up those stats? Because I
service.
just did the exam and I'm pretty sure that it was only 6,000 tokens for 3.5.
Yeah, it was 8 and
That's
32,000.
that's exactly what you should say if you're trying to
Now,
convince someone that you can't. Never, ever, ever
yes,
admit that you're a
exactly.
cat.
Okay, so the other area is cognitive search, now known as AI search in Azure, because they love changing up these names. So if you're doing a search for any of the resources, you'll find them under cognitive search or the new AI search, which is the new term for it. So one of the questions that Brad asked me before we started was, well, why do you need the AI search? And this is to allow you to index data that your OpenAI wouldn't know about. So if you just deploy OpenAI onto Azure, it's exactly the same as if you got a link through to or an API to ChatGPT and started asking it questions. It will only know about information that it's been trained on in terms of the LLM. But with cognitive search, you can now point it to some of your own internal data, whether that's in SharePoint, whether that's on websites, whether that is information that's stored in your Azure blob, as an example, where you're just throwing documents in that you wanted to search through. What the search service does is it indexes the data and then allows you to search against that data using OpenAI. There are a couple of other things that it can put in place, like setting up vectors. I'm not even going to go in there because it just gets your mind spinning in terms of the functionality. But I am
When you
going
said
to open
vectors,
up
did you mean
cognitive search.
facets?
No, vectors.
Vectors and
So
facets.
when you are yeah, well, it could be, but just wanted to talk about vectors because when you put information into an index, it's quite important to make sure that you are finding the information that's relevant to you. Now, what vectors does is it breaks up content into mini chunks, which are called vectors, and it looks for the closest relationship between what you've typed into search, which it also converts to a vector, and what's actually in the index. So that's where vectors come in really useful in terms of searching LLMs. Okay, so we've got AI search open and we've got a number of components here. So for our example, we are wanting to look at a data source. And in our case, our data source is going to be SharePoint. And if we open up that data source, we will see the JSON object that gets configured here. So we're telling it, okay, go to our intranet and look for libraries specifically in the EO area, which is our employee onboarding. Now, this is quite important in terms of identifying, firstly, where it's looking and what to include, because depending on who's looking at this data, you definitely don't want to point this at your entire SharePoint instance because it would be logging in with the account that you've logged into Azure here and searching through all of the data. So it could be showing information that is really only privy to certain
Yeah,
people.
this was the privacy concern about attaching Copilot to your data.
Exactly, and that's why now Copilot they do exactly the same thing. They tell you in Copilot what you're allowed to look at, and once again, it takes into account your login credentials. But remember here, there are no login credentials when you are logging into or when you're
What do you
indexing. It's
mean there's no
indexing on
logging
your own
in
account.
credentials when you're logging in? What do you mean?
Well, when you're indexing. Okay, so
So
that's
this
the
is run
data
by a
source that
service
we've
which
pointed at
obviously logs in,
SharePoint.
right?
And yeah, and we've pointed that specifically at our library, which we showed you over here, or our set of libraries like playbooks, policies, etc.
Okay.
We then create an index, and the index runs on a regular basis using an indexes. And what the index does is it tells AI search what it must look for, like what metadata, who this was created by, what the content is,
Mm-hmm.
etc. And then the indexer is, you could imagine, like a timer job where it kicks off that index and it keeps your information up to date. So you could run that just once and it only shows you information from when that was run, or you can set this up on a regular basis. Now, if you're setting it up on a regular basis, there's obviously a cost involved because it will run through all of the documents and confirm what's up to date, what's been changed, etc. And every time you run an index, it takes the information and it stores it in a blob, and therefore you're paying for the storage as well as the indexing function. So there are free licenses where you can set this up for up to 3 indexes, or alternatively, you could go to a basic license. I looked at the costing in South African rands, and it was looking at about 1,500 rands a month to
One and
run
a
3
half thousand
licenses, or
rand.
you can go up to standard, and then Yeah, so I mean, it's nothing in terms of international money, but in just to give you an idea there. But obviously, you can ramp up from there, and the cost will change according to how often you're running the index and how much data
But you
you
can
are
obviously set
indexing. Because
budgets and alerts and that, right?
correct, I mean, like anything in Azure, you've got that ability to
Right
set
here.
your
So
budgets.
we've indexed, we've data sourced. Now what? Now how do we
Okay, now you actually want to
yes.
use the data. So this is where we have to build something like a chatbot, and that chatbot could be using a web interface. It could be using Teams. So for this example, I've set it up in Teams because it's easy. You're on it already, and you want to have a conversation. Now there are a number of ways that you could do this, but I'm going to show you an example. Jumping over here to Teams, where I've got a bots channel set up specifically so I can start asking questions. Now, we internally like the name Gizmo. Gizmo is our internal kind of GT agent. So, in terms of that, we could have a normal conversation on a channel, or we could start a conversation, start a post when it finally works here. Come on, start my post. Where I can ask Gizmo a question. So I could say, Gizmo, what is the sick leave policy? Now, in terms of the interaction here with Azure behind the scenes, what this is doing is it's monitoring this channel. And it kicks off and tells me, hey, it's going to OpenAI to go and look for my information. It then searches through cognitive search, and it can't find a document to specifically tell me about the sick leave. So let's try one that I know that definitely Gizmo. What is the work from home policy? Now, this will look through that specific set of data and return to me only things that it finds within that data. Now, where you have included the vector management as an example, it will do a better search job than just the plain text here. This is doing plain text search against the AI search service. Now, it can take a little while to do this. You would imagine in a normal scenario, maybe you wouldn't do this through Teams. Maybe you interface it through something the like a web app or something of the sort. But as you can see here, it's gone and had a look through our documents and said, okay, the work from home policy, and it's pulled out that information specifically from our work from home policy document. The benefit here being that I didn't even type in work from home. I typed in WFH, but we've got that acronym throughout our documentation, but it understood exactly what I was looking for. Now, we've done this with the policies and playbooks and the like, but obviously you can point this at any of your data in SharePoint or elsewhere in a blob store or something of the sort. So your ability to start creating a data source where you can have these chats through a bot is actually only limited by your imagination. But you need to take into account multiple things like that security. Where is it getting the information from? Who's got the ability to see it, etc. Now, the nice thing with the channels is that you can create channels specifically for a team. So let's say you've got the sales team and you only want the sales team looking at the sales data that is sitting in your CRM plus any of your sales documentation. Well, you can give rights to that channel only to the salespeople, and thereby kind of limit what's being seen in terms of the security. And the same for the indexes. You can set up multiple indexes, and therefore it changes the API call that you make. You tell it which index you want to look through, and that will limit what is brought back from Azure Cognitive Services. So, Brad, in terms of what you required, in terms of kind of having a look at your policies or something of the sort, and bringing back the data, is that along the lines of what you were expecting?
So when I got the working from home policy, I was like, yeah, that's great because we know that search is not the best. And so obviously search could bring back this or it could bring back a number of other things, but it wouldn't bring back the specific points. So that's really cool and that works well. So now if all of this is working, but you're not getting the right results and you need to improve it, how you can improve it, right? That like we were chatting about earlier, like you can start to improve this based on the requests that you kind of can assume coming in by adding facets and other additional temperature gauges. I think that's what they call them.
Correct. Yeah. So, I mean, there are a number of ways. So obviously, the more documentation this has access to, the more accurate it's going to be. You could point it at multiple sources that will start improving it, but you could also mess around with things like the temperature, etc. So when it comes to that, you actually have to go into our models. So let's jump across to our OpenAI model rather than the cognitive search. And interestingly, what I'm going to show you here is actually very similar to what you can do in Copilot. So with Copilot, you can add in multiple sources. You can change around the way that you engage with the data. You can test it, etc. So what I've opened up here is Azure AI Studio. And this is an area where you can test out your OpenAI functionality. And here you can see things like chats and completions, Dolly, if you want to test out generation of imagery. Um, and, we've got multiple types of models. We've got deployments that we've made. And if we go through to models, you'll see here that it shows us all of the types of models that are available within the environment. So here we've got things like GPT-4, GPT 3.5,
What's
embeddings,
Whisper?
which is used for vectors. Sorry, what is Whisper? That's for voice models specifically. So some of these models are dedicated to certain types of functionality, like the embeddings model is so that you can embed data to create the vectors that you need, whereas the GPT
Is LLM.
3.5, 16K, the normal GPT, GPT-4, GPT 3.4, etc. And then there are different previews as well. So that's just the version of the
Mm-hmm.
model. Okay, but anyway, let's jump across to the chat playground. And within the chat playground, you can take your deployment and you can start messing around with some of the functionality around parameters like telling you how large responses should be, temperatures. There are a whole bunch of items here that you can fiddle with to try and improve your answer. But also, you can add data. So in terms of adding the data, you've got a number of different choices there. So rather than going through the process of setting up that
Index.
AI search, you still need the AI search component, and I'll show you why. But you can set up AI search as your data source, or you could say, you know what, I want to
Yeah.
upload files. and you can upload the files directly. But what you'll see is, firstly, it uploads to a blob store. And once it's uploaded to the blob store, well, what AI search resource are you going to use? So there's our normal search. Oh, I can't use the free tier.
Mm.
So now I'm going to have to go and use one of our costed tiers. So as you can see there are some restrictions. Like if you're using the free tier of Azure AI Search, there are certain limitations in terms of what you can and can't do, which will affect then any of my other ones here are paid for resources, and you can see that that functionality opens up. But it creates a new index. So if I was uploading files specifically for marketing, I could create a
Yeah.
marketing index and then give them that bot to start working with. Some of the other options that we saw there, sorry, just whilst we're there, was uploading straight from a web address, which is pretty cool. The web address there, you could point it at any of your resources online,
Doesn't
etc.
have a username
And
and
then
password. Yeah.
exactly, so that, but builds up all of those indexes for you. Very cool. One of the things that I didn't point out, and I think it's quite important as well, is that if you're trying to set the stuff up yourself, and specifically the integration into SharePoint, it's not that easy to do on the front end, unfortunately. Like everything good old Microsoft, you're going to need to have some know-how. So let me just take you back to our portal, and I'm going to open up our cognitive search again and go to our data sources and just go and edit that. So over here, it would be wonderful if I could make the changes in Azure itself. But you'll notice here it says, "Oh, sorry, we can't do this from the Azure portal," and we'll tell you to go and have a look at your documentation. And unfortunately, was also in preview, might still be, but you actually need to run web service API calls or REST API calls to start doing things like creating indexes, creating data sources, and you can actually see here where all of this data was set up. Now, this is called Postman. If you've never seen it before, you're obviously not a techie, but this is where it allows you to start running your API calls. You pass it some
It's a good
data, and
idea
then
to
it
share that
yeah, once you
application
hit
secret and
send.
tenant ID on a public podcast.
Yeah, exactly. Good thing that we're not showing service names and things.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah.
Okay. So, all in all, we can do it, and it is possible to improve. And I think personally, if it's in Teams and anyone in the company can chat to it and say, hey, what's happening with the work from home policy or what is the maternity leave policy without actually having to go to HR, I think that could be quite
Yeah,
useful.
I mean, to me, as a self-service item for your chats, most certainly, and you don't necessarily need to use it within a chatbot like I've shown you. You could put this in a Power Virtual Agent where all of this is actually driven behind the scenes by a Power Automate flow that it was generated that calls OpenAI and cognitive services, which you can do in Power Virtual Agent as well. That just means that you're limited to the channels that or topics that you create for Power Virtual Agent. And then obviously it's not quite as free flowing as chatting directly in the bot, as if it were just normal natural language. It would be more driven by specific requirements. But yeah, the back end is actually headless. You could use it
Yeah.
anywhere, whether it's on Teams or a web app.
Okay. Well, Craig, thank you very much. That's answered my questions. and I'm sure it's answered a few of our viewers' questions and our customers' questions. Thanks, bro. Thanks for thanks for
No
putting it
problem.
out there. Otherwise, what are we going to do next week?
That is a good question.
We could show them how we've did that Dora bot. That was cool.
Okay. Once again, pulling in information from multiple sites to show
Yeah, I
compliance. Yeah.
mean, you got Dora compliance, you got NIST 2.0 cybersecurity framework, you've got the NIST 2 European directive, you've got ISO, you've got tons of different compliance documents. How do you know that you're compliant? Why read 800 pages of material when you can just ask a bot to tell you what's up? That was pretty cool as well. So I think we've covered a lot of bot stuff there, and I think people have got a lot of value. Um, do we have a blog on this? We're going to put something together, chat GPT something together, Craig?
No
Awesome.
problem.
Well, thanks very much for your time today, and I'll see you next week. I enjoyed your a
Cool.
lot less distracting.
Thank you. I'll make sure that I tell the wife.
Yeah, thanks for that. All right. Thanks, Craig.